I want to jump right into this book, Gracism, the new edition. And man, maybe just talk about this to start. What gave you, because this is now, again, a second, or the follow up to the first book. What caused you to begin penning both of these books?
It started with reading 1 Corinthians 12 in a quiet time. And when I
Mm-hmm.
saw 1 Corinthians 12, that passage is famously known for the spiritual gifts
Yes.
and for this underlying principle that the Apostle Paul writes, which is we can have unity within diversity. And so when most Bible colleges, universities, pastors teach the passage, they use the illustration that Paul uses of being one body with many members, and they
Mm-hmm.
usually talk about spiritual gifts. What they miss is when Paul opens up this analogy, like any good preacher, you need to have a picture with a point. So he
Right.
wants to make the point, unity within diversity. He mentions it in verse 12, but then he doesn't start explaining it until verse 14.
Yeah.
So if you read verse 12 and then pick it up at verse 14 and keep going, you'll miss it.
Mm.
Problem is, he inserted verse 13. In verse 13, he says, neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, we were all given the one spirit to drink. Oops, what? You just inserted race,
Yeah.
color, class, culture?
Yeah. Big time.
What? Hang
Big
on.
time.
So the point that he was trying to make is that, listen, I want you now to read the rest of the passage through that lens,
Yeah.
not just through the lens of spiritual gifts, which I talked about prior to verse 12. But now I want to add to spiritual gifts, and I want you to think about what we just talked about, but now through the lens of color, class, and culture. But when you do that, when you read 1 Corinthians 12, verse 14 and following,
Right.
mind-blowing when you read it through the filter of race and culture. So
Right.
then when he picks it up and says, but the eye cannot say to the hand, I don't need you.
Right. Right.
Think about race and culture. Or the
Right.
foot cannot say to the, ear, I don't need you. But God has arranged the parts of the body the way he wanted them to be. And the weaker, it has to honor, the stronger has to honor the weaker. And when one suffers, they all suffer.
All
Oh my
suffer.
goodness. All of a
Yeah.
sudden, when you
Right.
start reading that through the lens of race and culture, it changes your understanding of what he's trying to teach us. And it also helped me to see something I hadn't seen before. And that is he's giving us a solution to division by teaching us 8 principles from verses 14 through verse 27 that we would not have seen otherwise. And so that's how it all got started. So I pinned that, and I really want to have a positive solution to a negative problem. The negative problem is racism. The positive solution is grace. And those 8 standards or principles that he teaches us are what we call the 8 sayings of a gracist.
And I love that. One, I love the gracist phrase, right? And two, was a couple things. One is the way the book made me feel. Right. So I think, sometimes you can approach these topics, you're thinking about it intellectually, but then there's also the emotional piece.
Right.
And I think wrestling with your own emotions of where you're starting from, but then beginning to be open to, okay, hold up. That person on the other side of the table has feelings too, right? I sometimes use this phrase, we can go from listening to hearing to empathy, right? And getting to that empathy point. And I think your book does such a good job of walking you through that, both in thinking about some techniques and the stories you tell. And so I would love to do this. When you talk about the heart of the graces in those 8 items, I mean, obviously it would be hard for us to go through all 8, but maybe just pick 3, and maybe let's just start talking through a couple of those things of what it looks like to be a gracist.
Well, I tell you, the first one is so important because these are I will statements. And if you're in a community, it's we will statements. If you're in a country, it's we will statements. But I will lift you up. So the idea of lifting, that comes from the phrase special honor that Paul mentions in the text. And so what does it mean to have special honor? What does it mean to lift people up? Well, when we start thinking about issues of race and division, if we ask ourselves the question, who needs to be lifted? And what's the best way to lift them? And one of the things that I remember is when I was in England for the first time and I was in the Heathrow airport in London, I was looking to get from one floor to the next, and I was asking people, can you tell me where the elevators are? And they're like, elevators? Here, sir, we call them what?
Lifts.
Lifts. And I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. And
Yeah.
so I thought to myself, there's a picture of what God wants me to do. When people come into the area of my life, am I going to be like an elevator that will lift them from one level to a
Mm,
higher plane? So when they leave my presence, they are higher than when they came in. And
yes.
with lifts or with elevators, you can either take people down or you can take people up. And I've
Absolutely.
decided that if I'm going to be a gracist, I'm going to be like God. And that's to lift people up out
Mm,
of their
mm.
sin, lift people up out of their division, lift people up out of their circumstances and situations to a higher plane. So a lifter is somebody who says, I'm going to honor people, whoever they are, when they come across the turf of my existence.
Yeah.
So that's
No,
one.
that's good. Mm-hmm. And
Pretty cool, right?
yeah, absolutely. And one of the things about that is lifting people up is again, I'm gonna use the word empathy again, the ability to ability, the consciousness to want to understand how a person needs to be lifted, right? And
Yeah,
and that it's not just. I think oftentimes one of the things your book did very well, I thought, was talk about, yes, we're going to feel things ourselves, but also the other person on the other side of the table may be going through something as well, right? And you use
yeah,
some
yeah,
very clear examples, and so that the identification of a person who needs to be lifted up, whole nother
yeah,
thing in and of itself.
yeah. Absolutely. And, I can't just come and tell you how I'm going to lift you up. I need to ask you, how do you need
Yes,
to be lifted up?
yes,
And you can go into a company, and if there's no women on the board, ask the women, they'll tell you. You know what I'm saying? And so,
yes,
we can't presuppose what lifts people up. We got to ask them. No one pushed me into the lift or the elevator. I wanted to go in, and then I wanted it to do something. And what I
that's
wanted it
right.
to do was take me up and take me higher. But, one of my other favorite sayings of a gracist, and remember, gracist, the word G, the letter G, and before the bad word racism, the G stands
Mm-hmm.
for God. So
Right,
you put
right.
God in front of any problem, he'll give you the strength to get through it and the solution
Mm,
to it.
mm-hmm.
And God is the biggest gracist of us all because he actually extended grace to another race. He wasn't
Right.
human, and yet he did that. And it wasn't just for the Jews, the race that Jesus was in, but it was also to the Gentiles. So, I mean, God is the greatest gracist of us all. So if we take his example and we live it out on the earth, we're going to solve this problem called racism. But one of my favorite sayings is the last one, the eighth saying, and that is, I will heal with you.
Mm, mm.
And that comes from one of the verses in 1 Corinthians 12, where it says, we rejoice with those who rejoice, but we also suffer with those who suffer, or grieve with those who grieve. I will heal with you is exactly what you were talking about, James, empathy.
Yeah,
In other words, listen, I may not be able to heal you, but I can heal with you.
with you. Yeah.
Right. And so healing, this phrase, this chapter, on the eighth saying, is really about empathy. If I can feel with you, then I can heal with you.
Mm, mm-hmm.
But if I
Mm-hmm.
can't feel what you're feeling, if I'm not willing to put myself in your shoes, then I'm just going to tell you to stop whining and get over it.